Shalom to you from oneforisrael.org. This week we are looking at the Torah portion from Numbers chapter 22 to 24 called Balak, after the name of an ancient Moabite king. Our parasha begins when this king of Moab, Balak son of Zippor, is fearful of the Israelites. He sees the great victories the Israelites had over two mighty kings and is petrified, realizing he cannot stand against the Israelites. In his despair, he attempts to call a famous sorcerer called Balaam ben Beor to curse the Israelites for him. Should be noted that Balaam lives about 500 kilometers away from Moab, so he must have been a very famous sorcerer. Ironically, since the Moabite descended from Lot, Abram's nephew, Balak would have done well to remember that his people, the Moabites, came into existence because of God's faithfulness to Abraham. In other words, joy rather than fear should have been a far more fitting reaction to God's continued blessing of Abraham's seed. A repeated theme of divine protection in this portion comes directly from God's original promise to Abraham in Genesis 12:3. Those that bless you, I will bless, and those that curse you, I will curse. In that verse, God promises Abraham's seed, the Israelites, his divine protection despite many adversaries. The first one to make explicit reference to that promise is Balak. On his first of two attempts to call Balaam, he says, "Come now, curse this people for me, for I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed." Balak attributes divine powers to Balaam's words. As Balaam considers this invitation, God reveals himself to him that night and says in verse 12, "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." When Balaam refuses, Balak does not take no for an answer. He was so fearful of Israel that he sent more dignitaries to summon Balaam, promising him even greater honor and greater reward. The promise of great honor and wealth proved to be too much for Balaam, and despite the specific instructions from God the first time, he attempts to go with Balak's messengers. Verse 22 indicates that God is angry that Balaam went, and he opens the mouth of Balaam's donkey, and a lively discussion begins between Balaam and his donkey. Though Balaam at first glance appears to be motivated entirely by his obedience to the Lord, we later read in Numbers 31:16 and 2 Peter 2:15 that Balaam's greed led to his downfall. When Balak and Balaam finally meet, Balak takes Balaam to 3 different locations in order for him to curse the Israelites. But Balaam is unable to utter curses on God's people. Instead, he refers 3 times to the Abrahamic covenant's promise of divine protection, and in the end, even utters a famous messianic prophecy. God is faithful and does not change his mind. Listen to Balaam's words. First, in chapter 23 and verses 19 and 20, "God is not man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind. Has he said and he will not do it? Or has he spoken and will not fulfill it? Behold, I received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot revoke it." Another time in 23:29, "Blessed are those who bless you, and cursed are those who curse you." And finally, the messianic prophecy in 24:17, Balaam says, "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel." This star that shall come out of Jacob is no other than the Messiah himself. Please note that while all this is happening, the Israelites, God's very people, are completely oblivious. Like them, we aren't always aware of the spiritual warfare going on around us. But God is faithful. His promises are completely reliable. He does not change his mind about his word. And like the Israelites, as followers of Messiah, we too are safe under the wings of his protection. This should be a great encouragement for all who walk with the God of Abraham and his Messiah Yeshua, even if at times God must remind us of this great truth by a mouth of a donkey. Please join us next week for another installment of 5 Alive. Wishing you God's shalom from One for Israel, and don't forget to share. Our ministry, One for Israel, is an initiative of native-born Israelis on the forefront of media and high-tech evangelism, boldly proclaiming salvation to Israel. Raising up leaders and equipping them with the tools they need to transform our communities. We also provide humanitarian aid to Holocaust survivors with the love of Yeshua. Join us as we share the gospel in Israel. Become One for Israel.